So 3:34 p.m., April 21st. For the record, we're calling to order this meeting of the Policy Committee. We have a couple things on our agenda, and this is really a chance for the Policy Committee to talk and share their ideas. Because as everyone out there may know from understanding Open Meetings Act, is the board can't talk about policy at all unless we are in the public face. So today is going to be a conversation really about how we should best move forward to support the superintendent's success as well as the continuity of learning, to make sure that we're not putting artificial barriers in place, but also make sure that we're holding the district accountable for the pieces that need to be there. So we're going to talk about CEO emergency powers resolution, what that needs to look like, how it should look. We're going to talk about the remaining policies from the calendar, from the 2019-20 school year calendar, what should be expedited to the beginning of the 2021 calendar, what might be able to be pushed off, what needs to be clumped, what might be able to be handled electronically, policy prioritization for 2021. And just so the community knows, that's going to be an initial conversation between this panel today, but at our annual board business meeting, that's another place where the entire board will weigh in on what we think should happen for the policy calendar moving forward in the next school year. In addition to that, some of you may or may not know, but within certain policies, there's a mandatory policy compliance review. So those policy compliance reviews are presented to the board either in the executive session, at the public meeting, or presented in a full presentation. So we're going to chat about where those should be in this time of crisis as well as moving forward. And then how are we going to get community engagement and make sure that we're not hearing just sort of a confirmation circle, but that we're getting the input from the people who are going to be most impacted by policies. So with that said, the way today's meeting is going to work is I'm going to first turn it over to Board Executive Gant to share with us some updates on the emergency powers resolution. Understanding that the purpose, when I first brought up, should we do this? Be very clear, it was a should we do this? So part of the discussion the policy committee will have is should we do this? And then the rationale that I used for why we should consider doing this is we want to set up a twofold situation. We want to make sure that the CEO has the ability to effectively do her job without being bogged down by calling on the board every single time a policy needs to be adapted to our new circumstances. For example, we have a dress code policy that says no one can wear face masks at schools. But now everybody who comes to school to pick up a meal or pick up packets needs to have a face mask on. So that would be a policy the board would just say, oh, just skip it. Don't worry about it. What we don't want to do is become in my perspective, this is just board member Hassan speaking. What we don't want to do is set up a situation where we just simply say, whatever policies don't fit in that point, just ignore them. So we have an opportunity moving forward in this point of distress to say, how are we going to be a nimble organization that balances the need for oversight and governance along with the need for autonomy for the superintendent? So I'll turn it over to Board Executive Gant to talk about the adoption of the resolution, and then we're going to go to each member of the policy committee. And what I'd like you to be able to share is just what you feel about the resolution. Should we have one? Shouldn't we have one? What else should be modified or changed? Knowing that in this committee, there won't be a vote to adopt or not adopt, but it'll be recommendations moving forward to the rest of the board. So I'll turn it over, and if anybody has any disagreement or a way that they prefer to approach it differently during your time to chat, we'll do that. So we'll do Commissioner Gant, then we'll do Commissioner McFadden, Commissioner Brooks, Commissioner Lynn, and then we'll do some cross conversation on the CEO emergency powers resolution. So Commissioner Gant, it's yours.
Board exec, not commissioner.
Board Executive Gant, bam.
Sure, I just wanted to share the outcome of my conversations with the Office of Legal Counsel and the CEO's office. My sense, of course, from the board meeting was that there was a desire, perhaps on the full board, or definitely the committee, to kind of limit the scope of the resolution. So to that end, working with the Office of Legal Counsel and the CEO's office, we kind of came up with some ideas for how to limit this to kind of fit what you'd like. For starters, on the first page of the resolution at the bottom, it currently states authority to temporarily, giving the CEO authority to temporarily suspend such board policies or provisions of board policies that the CEO shall deem necessary to comply with guidance from appropriate health or governmental authorities or necessary for effective response. So one thing we kind of surfaced in our conversation was the possibility of changing that changing that more to speak to the specific timelines in the policies. Certain policies have a timeline. Things have to be done by May, June, or within 30 to 45 days of an event. So some kind of language around the extent of, to the extent to which there is a deadline in the policy, the CEO shall reserve the right to adjust them until the state of emergency is lifted, as long as that's in compliance with law or contract. So that's one proposal to kind of limit this. The second piece is on page 2. In 2B, you see there's a long list of potential actions related to combat COVID and also wave. So we're thinking of possibly just keeping numeral 1, 2, and 10, which are a little more, directly related to the services provided and things that needed to be waived. And another piece that kind of surfaced in our conversations was that a lot of the deadlines are currently in the regulations and not the policy. So, as you all know, the CEO's office doesn't need the board's authority to change a regulation. But of course, we would continue with our practice of the CEO writing a memo and letting the board know what the change was. But also want to emphasize that any changes done under or during this emergency would be switched back as soon as we're out of emergency. So if there was an adjustment to the timelines, et cetera, in the regulations, it's just for the extent of the emergency. And at this point, I'll just turn it over to Josh Sivan, our Chief Legal Officer, to kind of speak on the more on the regulations piece.
Thank you, Josh.
I think Christian summarized well there. I think that the one other piece to add, just as an example, is the issue of the timelines on the ethics policy, as just an example that was brought up at the last meeting. So those are timelines that are in the regulation, and if we need to extend those, that would be one example where the CEO could extend the timelines as a regulatory matter and just keep the board informed of that. So that way we're keeping this tailored to pieces that we really need, and focusing on the regulatory language when we can to narrow the impact on the board's policy.
All righty. So we'll go commissioner at this point, and then what I'd ask is if other commissioners, once we get through each person getting their sort of say on this, where they're feeling, if you want to just pop in the chat that you'd like to talk, then I can call on you from that. And that's not me trying to be a controlling human being. That's me trying to make sure that everybody gets equitable time, and that we don't miss anyone. So Commissioner McFadden, thoughts, ideas, questions, needs?
Thanks, I appreciate it. When I think, Christian, what you said, and Mr. Sivan, Joshua, I appreciate what you all brought to the discussion. There's still something that is going unanswered for me, and I'm curious to know what the State Department of Education has done in regards to this, something similar, and what have other school systems done? Have other school systems adopted a resolution? Have they done something similar to this as what we're going to do? Because at the onset, based on what Christian and Joshua just said, I don't think that there is much of a need to do a full resolution versus some sort of statement that addresses the timeline with the regulations. So that's pretty much it. For me, there are a few things within the draft that we saw on Tuesday that I think that if we do a resolution, I don't think that we need one, but if it is the will of the committee and the board to do a resolution, I'm thinking that it should be way less wordy. I think that we should take out, I'm wondering what things actually have to be in the resolution and what doesn't have to be there, because it can be read a bit confusing. We definitely don't, in my opinion, I don't think that we should have language in that says suspending board policies versus talking more about the actual regulation and the timeline around that, if that makes sense to everyone. So I'm guessing I would like to know the first part of the set of questions. What is the State Department doing? What are other school systems doing in regards to something like this? And then secondly, if we are going to do something, I think it should speak primarily to the regulation and not necessarily to the policy, because everything that we're doing and that the CEO will be doing will pretty much be similar to what we have done historically in regards to policy, handling policy.
All righty, thanks. Commissioner Brooks.
So thank you for that, Commissioner McFadden. I guess I am also sit in similar feeling in terms of understanding the utility of a resolution to sort of advance any sort of emergency sort of powers, given that if it's around compliance, and regulation specifically, that the CEO would be able to do that and make adjustments where necessary. And so my general feeling from last week and about how this resolution came is it has gone unchanged. I was deeply frustrated by the process, and even though it was offered Commissioner Hassan as a recommendation, and I heard it as a recommendation originally, but the having to discuss that in a public space for the first time, I think is what really kind of ticked me off a little bit. And so I think in terms of a process and the actual resolution, my thought is that if Dr. Santelises needs additional space and opportunity to effectively do her job as a CEO, I am 100% confident that she would let us know. And and making a decision like this to sort of grant sort of what I read in that as kind of blanket authority in many different ways wasn't necessarily, from my perspective, the most useful thing that we could do. If there was a question about the supports or the board supporting our CEO, I think that could be, if we need to make a statement, we can make a statement about our support, how effectively we think that she is handling that, and yeah, so I think, again, I'm trying to figure out the purpose of having a resolution, and it is still not clear to me why we would need that. And I think to sort of add a question in all of this, I've heard at least two scenarios where we would have to shift. One was around sort of some of the regulations, what did you say, Christian? Around, Martha, you said a policy around wearing masks. I think you said something about online or distance working from home policy.
I mean, there's a number of policies that to address this question directly.
I'm not finished though. So let me just finish what I'm trying to say. So what I was trying to say was that, like, there are, if you can give a list of the policies that might be impacted immediately that are actually critical for the functioning of the institution, then I think we can have a different conversation. However, I do not believe that we need to be flexible and to say, like, if there is something that needs to be on hold or to be suspended for a particular moment in time, I think it might be useful to identify what those things are instead of generating a blanket resolution to say, oh, let's just waive everything. So that's kind of just my recommendation.
Okay, great. So I apologize. I thought you were asking me an actual question. So I did not mean to interfere with your answer. So we'll go to Commissioner Lin.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Josh.
Um, I I agree with my colleagues when we talk about, the need for the resolution. Uh, as I s- last Tuesday in our board meeting, I still feel the same way. I think that there are no scenarios that were given that is a necessity for this resolution to happen. It's continuously, I said, with the conversation that I had with Dr. Bardima, in the board meeting, those things are, you know, they're not important emergency things that are needed for this resolution to be put in place. And I think that, with a lot of these, examples going on, it's not, they're not valid enough. And I think that, the board, should be implemented in a lot of things, during this time, especially, in my opinion. I think that this time is very crucial for a lot of opinions to be held on certain issues. And if certain issues are taken to be put in place, I do think that, there's a lot of perspective that needs to be had. I think that, with the excuses that were made, or the explanations, I should say, that were made about, she has to do things, automatically in time, and, you never know what's going to happen. And I would go against that, and I would say, like, that's the point of virtual life in a sense. I think that in the 21st century, there's a lot of different ways, and like we're connecting now, there's so many different ways that we can connect that, the excuse or the explanation that, she might have to make it in that split second, I think that, it would be no problem. And I don't think any board commissioner would have a problem having an emergency meeting in order to enact certain things, or in order to, decline or accept policies or regulations or whatever is in that conversation. I think that, we would be more than happy to, because we all are here to serve our community. So I do think that, that's my point on it. More so of a question, I think that it's, where did it come from? I think that that's very important to, think about when we're talking about, the recommendation for this resolution. I think the origin is very important, just because, like, what was the purpose? And I think that a lot of us, not even just in the policy committee, but a lot of us as commissioners are wondering, where did this start from, and what was the need for it, coming along during this process of, COVID, and a lot of different things are attacking, or, in our community right now. So that's it. That's it.
All righty. So just to address a couple of the pieces. One, I'm still in the position of just throwing this out to the board. Do we want to do this? I have no horse in this race. The idea that we just do a statement, it is perfectly fine. The way boards typically do statements is through resolutions. So we might need to work on the language of the resolution, or we can throw it out. My personal, if I weigh in as just a board member, I want to make sure that there's a lot of the policies are little piddly, and I don't mean piddly like we're not important as policies, but they're policies that would distract from a continuation of services of learning, the remote work policy, things like that. So what I would prefer we not get in the habit of is just saying the superintendent can at any point decide to pay attention to or ignore whatever policies are convenient or inconvenient. If we want to do that as a statement that's not a resolution, I'm fine. If we want to ignore this altogether, I'm fine. What I want to make sure that we are doing, though, is if we have a policy in place, if we go through the policy process, making sure that it doesn't undermine the meaning of all policies moving forward. What MSD is, there are other districts that have gone through, and I'm sure that, Christian can pull it together. I can help pull it together, that have done resolutions and or complete policies, much like we have a policy where the superintendent has an emergency procurement policy. This was when I floated it again, and again, we can't vote officially, but we could decide as a policy committee to just say, we don't want to talk about this anymore, we're moving on. And it's our policy, it's not my idea. But what I want to be careful of is making sure that the superintendent has the coverage she needs to do the work she needs to do, and that we don't set ourselves up for a practice of, well, this policy is inconvenient right now, so we're going to ignore it. And moving forward in kind of those respects. So with that, I'll open it up for sort of cross chat. And what do people think? Do we want to just say no emergency resolution? Understanding that, again, a statement, unless you want to do it some other way, typically from a board is a resolution, is how that goes forward. So throwing the ball.
Commissioner James.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
A couple of things. If this was just an idea, I'm curious to know how it got to the board for a full vote. If this was just something that we were considering.
You know,
but then also, I'm curious to know.
There's a small orange mini stapler, and I couldn't find it when I was.
Somebody chit-chatting, if you could mute yourself, unless you're trying to get to us, that'd be great. Oh, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Fad.
I'm also still, I want to know concretely what other systems have, what they've done. Perhaps that can give us some guidance in how we move forward, because that still is not clear. You know, what are other systems doing, if they're local or if they are abroad, in regards to making a statement or resolution like this. And then also, if the resolution that we saw last week, if it has been amended, I'm hearing, you know, Christian and our chief legal officer saying that they have played around with it. I would like to see that. But should it be something that specifically speaks to the resolution? Because it doesn't sound like to date, any of our policies have been waived. And if they have been waived, the actual policy and not the resolution, not the regulations, can we get that information? So I'm curious to know, are there policies that we are currently out of the policy? Are we out of compliance with those policies versus the regulation, what the CEO was actually able to do in implementing the policy?
Christian, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Sorry, I was taking notes. I will not. I don't have an exhaustive list, but I know we received, for instance, a waiver from the state on the graduation policy, right? So I don't have a list of concrete policies that we're out of compliance with, but I do know there's a cross section that we're looking at. There are some, where possibly state waivers may be forthcoming. And again, the concrete example I can point to. Oh no, I'm sorry. Well, that was a regulation. So that, yeah.
So it doesn't sound like there's a need for policies perhaps to be waived, but perhaps the timeline, as Mr. Sivan was saying earlier, with the regulation, what governs those, perhaps we need to speak more to those rather than policy, because if changes happen within the regulation anyway, that still has to come to the board for information. So,
well,
I get that, and again, while it may appear that I'm advocating for this, I'm really trying to be a voice of multiple constituencies. But things like the attendance policy. So if you don't attend physically X percentage of classes, you're supposed to fail. Well, does that apply now? Or are we saying, what does attendance look like? And we need to be more malleable on that.
But wouldn't that also be covered in the governor's, emergency order that the governor is doing? And wouldn't that actually be perhaps state policy and waiving versus us having to do it on the local level? I would assume that if we have an emergency order that has been enacted, it kind of trumps all of the local things that are happening. So do we actually need to put in writing that which has already been taken care of through the executive order of a governor or perhaps the state board?
So personally,
I understand us wanting to, take care of you know, make sure that all of our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. But I also don't want to put us in a place where we're doing more than what is necessary in this crisis.
So if I could have predicted a boilerplate to get down to, that's actually what I'd like. I'd like personally just to be able to say we're relinquishing our responsibility over control and oversight to the needs of this emergency situation. But I didn't feel like we could do that without getting to that point together as a group.
Well, I think that with the emergency order, I do believe that, you know, all lower municipalities are definitely, you know, for it. So I do believe that, you know, Commissioner McFadden, your attendance policy, you know, would not really be affected, considering that, you know, we are in a very, you know, unprecedented time. So, I mean, we can look more into that with legal, but I do definitely think that, you know, lower municipalities all over the state are definitely, you know, avoiding and voiding that, you know, attendance policy, because I'm pretty sure other LEAs and definitely other states definitely have attendance policy. So I do definitely know that, you know, they have probably also, you know, dealt with that situation as well.
Right.
Is it okay? Do you mind if I jump in? This is Allison Perkins Cohen, Chief of Staff. So I appreciate the conversation and discussion around this. I think maybe, you know, if it's helpful, I think we're happy to go and look through specific policies and figure out if there are specific timelines that are where there's a problem. I mean, we appreciate the thought of the board to try to figure out if this was something that would be helpful and the offer of assistance. But we're happy to also look through to see if there are specific problems that we have. I'm not personally aware of immediate problems that it has caused, but we're happy to kind of go and do the work to see if there is something that that has triggered like a timeline problem or other problems that we need to flag for the board, and then come back to you with those specifics if that's helpful.
Okay, so to me, it sounds like it's the will, at least of this committee, to say, let's table this and hear from the CEO if there's any concerns and take them as a one-off. Let's do a little straw. We aren't voting, obviously, because we're not a quorum of the board, but we can recommend to the board to set this aside. So let's just go kind of down the roster and weigh in. We'll go backwards direction this time. So I'll go Commissioner Lynn. Would you just, am I correct in hearing that we just assume to just table this and move on?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, Commissioner Brooks?
Sure, yes.
Okay, Commissioner McFadden?
Yeah, I don't see the need for this. Allison, I appreciate you chiming in about that work on the staff's level. I think that's important in order for us to move forward. So yes, I think that has to happen before we need to create any type of statement or resolution like this.
And I will add
to we can work with the council and CUBE and other organizations to figure out what other districts are doing around this. Does that work? Yes, no, maybe so.
Sure.
Yes, Allison, yes.
Yes, works for me.
Sure. Also, this is Christian. I'll add then, you know, if there's going to be a kind of list or suite of policies, we already have a policy venue for that. We have policy BDF, which allows for suspension, the board to approve by majority vote the suspension of certain policies. So, you know, I think we have a possible, vehicle for that already. If we're going to, if the CEO is going to look at the specific policies that have timelines or other problematic implications.
Yeah, I think that's right. There may not be anything that we need. I'm just offering, since I think the board is, I think understandably asking questions about a blanket authority, and that is not, I absolutely understand why. So I think we're happy just to kind of look to see if there are specific things that are giving us concern that we can't address in a different way, and we could come back to the board if we identify any items like that where it would be helpful to give us some specific clarity around particular issues.
Okay.
And so Allison, I also just wanted to also thank you not only for the comments last week, but also today, and specifically because a part of me, I think a part of my frustration was that it looks like a power grab by Dr. Santelises. And that's not the case. This wasn't a case where the CEO was trying to say, oh, give us more, give me more. And yet when we have so many narratives perpetuating out here and floating around, that's not one that we need to give any attention or time to. And I think that was a kind of a part of my sort of frustration with how this went, because it just wasn't a true scenario. And then I also have had conversations with some colleagues in other school districts, and there has been nothing that required any sort of thing like that so far, and that was with 2 of them. So, but as you all go, and you might find that other people have made changes, but the 2 commissioners I've spoken with in different cities, they have not put forth like any policy or resolution like this at their level.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. And I would like to just also share that this was not something that the CEO initiated. This came out of a conversation that the board had. So I also wanted that to be clear to members of the public and our stakeholders. This was not something that the CEO and the CEO staff came up with. This came out of a conversation that the board had. And it just got to the full board for a vote, in my opinion, too quickly. So just want to say that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That's helpful. Yeah. I wanted to make sure that was clear too. Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is open up the floor for any other like final comments, ideas on this, understanding that we're going to go ahead and table it, and that the CEO will come to us if there are policy barriers that she has to doing her work, and with the understanding from the board that there's going to be policies that are going to get skipped over because they're not eminently important in the working of the day-to-day in our new scenario. So we started with Commissioner Lynn, so we'll go to Dr. Brooks. Any final comments on this as we wrap up? Commissioner McFadden? Back to Commissioner Lynn for final on this one. Board Executive Gant, anything?
I don't have anything.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that no one felt like their voice was scrunched in this weird platform we're working on. So just from a standpoint, I just really appreciate everybody willing to lean in on that. And just one more time, just reinforce that this was not from the CEO. It was brought up as a comment coming from other districts just to make sure there weren't any barriers to her being able to do the work she needed to do, but was not in any way her trying to capture any kind of power or us trying to capture or restrain power. So the next agenda item is to review policies from the 2019-2020 calendar that are outstanding, to see both triage, like what should come first, what should we guide staff to saying this is more emergent than the other. In this time, understanding we're going to have 2 calendars that are going to flop on top of each other. The short-term residual from what we had in the 2019 to 2020 calendar, as well as what we're going to set up for 20 to 21. So in that same sort of round robin way, if that's working for people, and if it's not, somebody give me a chat message so I know that it's not working for you and we'll try and pivot. But in looking at the policy calendar for 2019 to 2020, and is it possible for us to get that put up on the screen for the public? If not, I'll keep talking slowly and really slowly to make it possible to happen.
It is up actually.
Okay, sweet. So let's start in the middle of the deck. Dr. Brooks, ideas, thoughts on how we prioritize residual items from the 2019-2020 calendar moving forward?
Could you, for some reason, the whole thing disappeared?
Yeah, that's why I asked. I'll
just add it's also on board docs under section 202, at least the policies that were not yet introduced or passed, or policies in the reader process. So it's also on board docs, just for everybody's information.
And if you're on a Mac, for me, I can't figure out how to get from Teams to Board Docs back and forth. So
Yeah, it is. I
So-
agree. The share screen function has disappeared.
yes.
Now, I could share my screen from Board Docs if you all would like. Oh, Joe is back.
Thank you, Joe.
Sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to do a shared screen from the Google Chrome, but I figured it out.
Okay. So here we have a list of the policies that are in the reader process and those that are not yet introduced. So officially we'll have to do at a board reading or a board meeting, either waive the reader process or kick back JKA, ACB, GBEH, and IHBB to restart, or we have to decide, and we'll talk about community engagement, how much you want to move forward in July. So sort of just looking calendar wise how we move forward.
Yeah, so this is Commissioner Brooks. I feel like there's it would be helpful to know, and I know this is probably going to differ based on just the policy. Allison, do you have a sense of like, what does it really take in terms of time and effort to for a policy to be revised by a staff person? The actual labor-ish, so that to kind of get a better sense.
Yeah, so I'll start, but then Josh should also jump in. But it depends, obviously, on the on the significance of the changes that you want to make. I mean, sometimes we make pretty minor policy changes just to comply with a new provision of law, or just to address a particular issue, and so that's a very different situation. Sometimes, like if we're doing a quite significant overhaul and it's a sensitive. Part of it is the engagement process. So if it's a fairly significant policy change that that there's a number of members of the public or staff that care about it, then there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that all those different groups are heard in the development process. So I'm sorry, I apologize if I'm not being very precise, but it's a little bit hard of a question to answer because it depends somewhat on the process. I think it often takes, I don't know, I would say, a month or two for the drafting part of it, but that's only part of it. And then there's the, that, and again, that's really, depending on how many meetings it takes with different stakeholders to get the content. And then it also, once it's drafted, you usually go back to your stakeholders and share it with them. And then of course, the legal team is reviewing it as well. So, but I know Josh has, might have different thoughts too about what this process should look like, and he's already been doing a lot of great thinking about how we could improve the process, so he might have other things he wants to add.
Allison, I think you did a great job. I only say that getting up to speed still on the policy process here from my prior experience in another county, but the steps, and particularly I think it's important to make sure that all of our policies stay aligned so that when we work on one issue, we make sure that we don't bring it out of whack with other policies. And that's critical the bigger the category or the topic is in terms of its effect across the board, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and Allison and Josh, really helpful. And I think sort of what I was it's helped me to think about in terms of how we prioritize, right? So based on our discussion, are there particular areas where we feel that there might be a robust, or a policy that might require a robust engagement, and therefore we might consider, based on the level of effort, given the particular crisis that we're in right now, if it's actually, do we need to amend that or put it on pause? And so, so if there are some policies that we don't necessarily think that will require a lot, then we can probably, prioritize a little bit different. So I'm just trying to get a better sense on how to prioritize, whether it's around time, effort, that sort of thing.
So Josh or Christian, do either one of you want to try and take that question?
I was just gonna, I think some of what Commissioner Brooks's question kind of dovetails into our section 205, which I was gonna let you introduce as an idea. So
that's why I knew that. That's why I teed that up for you.
Oh, well, okay. Well, if we're gonna jump around a little bit, Commissioner Brooks, that's actually pretty timely because in our conversation with Commissioner James Hassan, we thought about perhaps for the board's calendar review this year for the board annual business meeting, we kind of do incorporate more of a structure or idea behind the expected engagement behind the policies. So, for example, some of the policies, such as I could say legal representation, right, skew closer to the policies and regulations, and there's the regulations and the statutes. So there's only so much room to maneuver. Whereas, of course, like a KCA, which is family and community engagement, there's more flexibility and freedom to kind of craft it. So we kind of envision perhaps some form of like a rough tier list for policies, which kind of gives the board and the public an idea of what the community engagement will look like. So for instance, again, a tier 1, which would be the bottom, would be, and I'm just using an example, not to beat up on it, but like a legal representation, which kind of closely skews to, statute and regulations. So of course there would be some community engagement, but there's not a ton of room to draft, or even code of ethics, because as I started drafting it, there is a model code of ethics in it, which we can't stray from too much. And then perhaps a tier 2 would be kind of the baseline of what we do now, which is, there's some engagement / drafting from the community. It's kind of a mix. So I think a potential tier 2 what we do now. And a tier 3 would be, again, I would like, for example, KCA, where as there's community engagement given before it is drafted, and there's more extensive engagement such as, forums, surveys, et cetera, for that policy. So I think your comment kind of dovetails into our thoughts and potential, way of moving forward for the board and the public to know what engagement will look like for potential policies.
Yeah. Thank you.
So with that, Commissioner McFadden, any ideas, comments on sort of the triaging of our current calendar?
I think that depending on the engagement that needs to happen around the policies that are currently in the reader process, I think that we can incorporate them into our meeting calendar as we move forward. I'm assuming there's nothing on our calendar in June, so are we scheduled to meet in June and in May as a policy committee? The only thing that I see originally scheduled in May is BCA, that's the Code of Ethics. And then June was more of this meeting where we're planning for next year. So I'm just curious to know, are we done with meeting as a policy committee? Did we decide that? Yes or no?
I would like to turn that over to the group. I believe that
I just remember us having some sort of conversation about that, but I didn't know if there had been anything that came out of it. So I appreciate that. I think we should.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna jump in. My understanding was the board was gonna wait until June 1st to assess how the landscape looks. And if for instance, we're still on lockdown in July and August, what does engagement look like under lockdown? How does the policy committee proceed? But the intention is absolutely for the policy committee to resume this summer. I don't think it was a set hard, where the policy committee is resuming July or August. But again, the only set date is, June 1st, the board is going to assess how the landscape looks and the way to move forward.
Well, I think now more than ever, we're in a place where people are becoming more innovative in the way that they're reaching people. And I think that we can consider that also, looking at the way that we're going to have discussion in regard to the budget within the next week and a half or so. So I think that moving forward, as we prioritize our calendar, these things that are still in the reader process should be prioritized to go first. And then those policies that have not yet introduced, we should just work those through our calendar year moving forward. I'm guessing 21, starting in July. Joshua, Mr. Seven, you prefer to be called Josh or Mr. Seven? What is your preference?
I'm fine being called Josh.
Okay, I just want to be clear because I'm a stickler for that, Josh. So thank you. Can you talk a little bit about, you were mentioning another county that you worked for. Can you just briefly talk about their process and the similarity and the difference between ours and theirs based on your observations so far?
Sure. So I spent 6 years as the general counsel in Montgomery County Public Schools, and don't quote me on the exact number, but I believe we worked through on a substantive changes to maybe 6 to 8, maybe 10 policies a year. And we had a more formalized process of going out for public comment, but we were actually moving to a lot of creative ways to try to make sure we engage stakeholders. And there seems to be a lot of that work going on here as well. And we had it was a little bit different than the reader process, but a policy came multiple times to the committee, and then it got forwarded to the full board, and sometimes based on comments of the full board, came back at committee. So that seems very comparable to what you are doing here. And as I've started to make my way through the policies, it seems like there are, not surprisingly, lots of overlap and similarity and comparability among policies, obviously tailored to the specific needs of the two different communities that we are serving. But I would be happy also, to follow up with my thoughts as I observe your process, which seems very robust. So I'm quite impressed thus far.
And just so that you know, Josh, coming in and to clarify for Commissioner McFadden's question, our goal is to get to 6 to 10 really robust, deep dive policy conversations. When the policy committee was first formed 2 years ago, we had very, very few policies, and they were all board rules. So part of this, the work that we have, and the reason we see so many things now, is we're both converting board rules to board policies, as well as dealing with the legislative changes that are happening pretty profoundly along the way, and then getting to the substance of doing sort of a gap analysis of what policies are missing or who's not being protected, what opportunities need to be advanced, those kinds of things. So that's part of why our calendar is so full. But our goal definitely is to get to where we can do a deeper dive with much more robust public input along the way to supporting the work of the group. At least that was my goal. So I should put that on there.
I appreciate that. And Martha, you brought up the conversion of the rules to policies. So in our discussion today, as we're looking at prioritization and looking at the remaining policies, my other question would be, what do we still need to convert from board rules into policy? Because I think that should be at the top of our priority list, and then perhaps looking at some additions after that.
And I would simply add to that, the other thing that I'd like to think about is what can we eliminate? Like, where are the redundancies that might even be problematic redundancies? And if we are just an additive bin, we end up with, the spaghetti to Mars policy scope, and none of it's meaningful. So I would say yes, board rules conversion, adding on, and also what should we eliminate?
Yeah, this is Christian again. The policy committee has a copy of the remaining board rules. I can also pull that up on the screen if you'd like.
Would that be helpful for
Christian, where is that? You said we have it. It is
I emailed it to you all.
You just emailed it to us. Okay.
No, it was a while ago, but I can pull it up again if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be helpful, Christian. I'm not sure if I got it or whatnot.
So Josh, any comments on that sort of
While Christian's looking for that, I do think that, so I agree with the way you framed it, Commissioner Hassan, in terms of where we are, that we've been trying to catch up on these rules, and so we've been trying to push through because we're kind of behind. I do think we're in a different place now. I think we've been doing a lot of yeoman's work. The policy committee has worked really hard to get through a lot of important policies in the last few years, and so I do think we're beginning to be in a different place where we can start to slow down a little bit and actually look at across the policies that we have, and to your point, look for alignment and coherence across those policies, and to see if some of the gaps that we're identifying of issues or groups that are not being addressed completely, if we can do that through the policy framework that we have. And so I just wonder if this is a good year to do that, especially with a new set of eyes and a new chief legal counsel to help us do that, with just, a fresh pair of eyes coming from the district to kind of take this as a year where we do start to slow down and go deep as opposed to go wide. Because I think we absolutely had a need to go wide at first because there was just areas we had not sufficiently addressed. But I think we're in a different place now. And so I think really looking at it and trying to get that coherency and alignment across policies and going deeper with the policies and allowing for more thoughtful engagement. I know from a staff level, to Commissioner Brooks' question from the beginning, the pressure and the need to get these policies out has meant that the review at the staff level and at the board level has just been, had to been expedited. And so I think from a staff level too, it would be appreciated to be able to really spend a little bit more time now thinking about, now we've created this framework, how do all these pieces align to each other, and then how do we make sure we're implementing them well.
Great. That's really helpful context.
I would add to that is how do we do sort of business as usual as a policy committee moving forward with where do we seek public input? Is it before an initial drafting? Is it after a first round? Is it during the reader process? And I think this committee could really lean in at this time to figuring out, how do we do this the best to be not just wordsmithing with community input, but how do we allow the community to really be a force in guiding the policies that are going to be impacting them?
Just to that point, one thought that maybe is worth consideration is when policies first come, having a framing conversation with the policy committee before we actually put pen to paper about what's in this policy, what are some of the key issues that staff see and board members see, so that the first conversation is not in the wordsmithing realm, but in the concept of the big ideas. And then we move towards how do we respond to that conversation in draft, maybe a way to frame that up.
I appreciate that very much, very much. Commissioner, we haven't heard. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Brooks.
No, I was going to say, I think maybe, and that's to Allison's point, that now that we can start slowing down a little bit, we can actually have a little bit more back and forth before we even get to that place, which might not have been possible before just because we were playing catch up. Yeah.
Commissioner Lynn, we haven't heard your voice in a while. I want to make sure that you have thoughts that they're able to be on the table.
Oh, yeah. I just basically, in the beginning of the conversation, just really wanted to talk about, that it's very important that we have feedback. So, what Christian was talking about with those tiers and what, really needs feedback and what you really can't escape from it with legalities and stuff like that. So I really think those tier 3s or those tier 2s, definitely we want to have those, community input and those stakeholders input, just to ensure that we're taking all avenues just to make sure that, we don't have people saying, I didn't get to talk about this policy and, I just didn't appreciate it. And we really don't want that backlash because we're already dealing with a lot right now. So I think that, with the community input, I think it's very important with those tier 2s and tier 3s policies that are, still in the reading stages. So whatever is necessary for community input, whichever avenue I believe takes more time, effort, just to ensure that we're getting that input. I think that's a necessity. And going on with what Commissioner McFadden said, there's a lot of new and inventive ways that people are trying to connect with everyone. So I think that this is a good time as well, is necessary to ensure that community input is being held, just to, ensure that, we're having the, full conversation and it's not just a lot of, us yes men around the table. Just want to make sure that we're inputting, everyone's feedback and everyone's mind, within the conversation.
So
that's
from
really
that,
my main thing.
it's
Is
your,
the feedback,
oh, sorry,
the feedback.
there was a lag. I apologize.
Just the feedback, and just that's the most important part when we talk about these policies. Just because that's mainly where we get a lot of our, disagreements, and that's mainly where we get a lot of our, amending of, policies that eventually turn into, policies that are in stake now, and that impact school systems. Schools around the entire system. So yeah.
Thank you. And sorry about that. There was a lag, so I looked like you were finished. So perhaps we could look at the annual business meeting, when we look at the policy calendar, as a full board, we can figure out what are the requirements for tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, based on how do we want community engagement, sort of that pre-committee meeting conversation. How many are board conversions that just kind of need to be just pushed through? So within that sort of, for lack of a better word, triaging, like what kind of policies will be in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? What kind of communication do we expect in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? And maybe even saying in that, what will we say will be allowed to have a waiver of the reader process versus what must go through a 2-reader, 3-reader process? And looking at how we can then be able to, the things we need to deep dive, we can deep dive, and the things that are functory, we can get off the table so they're not in the way.
And I definitely with what Mr. Josh said regarding that preemptive conversation about the policy, what's going to be in the policy, what's the necessity. I think that's really important, because then that'll ultimately automatically put those into those automatic tiers of which one do we really think that the community is going to come out for, the community is going to talk about, that has that multitude of community input, just to ensure that we're acknowledging and understanding that hey, we're going to get a lot of input on this one, but legals and representation, we're really not going to do a lot of that. So I think that making sure we understand and we see that and also to make sure that us as commissioners are prepared to see a lot of the community input and see a lot of the stakeholders engagement with this specific policy or that specific policy, I think is very important, and I think definitely should be thought about or put in the vision. So yeah.
All right, for wrapping up the conversation sort of on process, Dr. Brooks, any other thoughts here?
No, I am good.
Okay, Commissioner McFadden, any other thoughts here?
No.
Okay, all right, so looking at the 1920 remaining policies, do we want to simply turn it over and say, staff figure out what works best for you, or are there guidance pieces that you as a committee would like to give on the 2019-2020 calendar? Specifically, there's one that's in second reader right now. Do we want to just put that on the agenda at the next board meeting so it's cleared, or do we think we need to push pause on everything? My anticipation as far as meeting calendar, we're not having any more policies that we'll see before July 1st, but I would like to still have the June meeting so that we can have a public conversation about calendar, if that works for the rest of the committee. If we want to just table that till the business meeting, we can do that as well. So I guess the two questions on the table right now are, do you want to talk 2019-2020 calendar? What should move to the front of the line? Or do you want to simply turn that over to staff and just say, let us know when you think you have bandwidth and capacity? And then 2, would you like to resume this conversation during a policy committee meeting in June to set up the setting of the policy calendar for 2021?
So this is Commissioner Brooks. I think for me, Commissioner Hassan, I think it's important that we hear from the staff around bandwidth, particularly I am open to sort of in June revisiting sort of the actual calendar, like sort of where we start to put things. And I know that we have some second reader pieces, and if they are, if we feel like we don't have enough capacity to have enough additional feedback, I wouldn't want to rush those things in order to, and then sort of catch flack on the other end. So for me, it would be helpful to kind of do some of that.
Catch flack, but if we don't get the right voices to make sure it's a. Right. Okay. Commissioner McFadden, any thoughts, ideas?
I agree with Dr. Brooks. I also like the idea of the June meeting being a time where the community is able to chime in on policy development and that process moving forward for the new year. But I think Dr. Brooks is right in making sure that our staff has the wherewithal to actually handle the process. So I think that should happen first. But I do like the idea of having that June meeting time designated to get some feedback from our community stakeholders and what policy development should look like moving forward. I don't remember an opportunity that we've actually, at least during my time on the board, opened up like that for the public, specifically just to discuss the policy process. Development process.
It's been one that I've really wanted to get on the table, but again, because we were so caught up in board rules and legal catch up, it was recommended by staff that we table that. So, again, like Allison is agreeing to, like, feels like now is the time we can sort of shift this from a transactional process to a transformational process. So Joshua, or I'm sorry, Commissioner Lynn, any thoughts? And just so you know, we can the tippy top of your head.
I just agree with Dr. Brooks. I think that we definitely, shouldn't rush anything. And I think definitely, as I previously stated, I think that if we need feedback on certain policies from the community or, whoever is, needed to have that feedback from, I think that should be very important. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So recommendation to staff at this point from this community would be for them to take a look and let us know sort of the order and sequence of the outstanding policies. Is that what I'm hearing from folks?
Agreed. I agree to that.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, and I guess the way that I see it is that, particularly, especially at this particular time, given COVID-19 and sort of staff energy level, and just to kind of get a sense of what's possible, and of the list of things, is there something that they have particular energy about that they would want to move, or absolutely just say no and take it off the table? So I think a little bit of that would help me just kind of get a sense of where people are. Because if folks say, well, no, we feel like we have time and energy, like, oh, okay, well, but I just kind of want to just get a sense of where they are at.
Okay. Commissioner McFadden, any thoughts? It's so hard in this platform to make sure that everybody's voice gets out. So I just want to make extra due diligence on that. So I apologize if you're frustrated by me continually calling on everybody. So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to toss it over to staff to let us know sort of if there's anything that, like, things that are in second reader that you think we should go ahead and consider at the next board meeting. Otherwise, sort of everything will be tabled until at least July, and we'll come together as a policy committee in June to look at actually month by month what we think that calendar should be before we vote on it as a full board at the board retreat. Is that correct? I hear an affirmative, 3 affirmative. Allison, no, I'll toss that over to you from staff. Does that work for you all, or do you need more guidance or direction from this committee?
No, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think it works also hand in hand, Allison, with what we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, actually looking at if we need to review policies for the sake of right now being in COVID-19. I think it all kind of goes in the same work vein, in the same stream of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, beautiful.
Yes, it's a great dovetail with that. Thank you.
Yep. So then what I would queue up for policy committee members is for that June meeting, also linking in with your networks and doing some reflection on personally where you see gaps or what you think policies need to be on the 2021 calendar, with the cognizant understanding that we have bumped a bunch of things from this year. So for me, I can say one of my priorities will be the community engagement policy, because that's been tabled for a long time. But I think the policy committee can set up a really synergistic relationship with community engagement in getting that community voice in advance of drafting that policy. So much like we tried to do with the equity policy and the school police policy, by getting the community's input in advance of a solid draft. So that would be my own. But when we come to that June meeting, if people could have really done some thought on how you want that calendar set up, what do we think is best from each of our own squares as well as the collective. Fair enough?
Yeah, Commissioner Hassan, I think on our end, is there a way for you to sort of set up a tentative frame for sort of policy in terms of you in the beginning named almost like a ranking, sort of like in terms of low, medium, high, sort of in terms of priority or importance, maybe not importance or significance, in terms of like, because my thought is that I'm thinking that in order for me to, one of the things that I'm interested in is looking at our policies totally, figuring out what major buckets they fit in order so that I can see if there are places of gaps and opportunities. So if there's any framework that you have that might be useful to guide how we see or sort of create these bigger bucket categories for districts, that might be helpful. And that's not to throw work at you, but if you know of anything that might be helpful for us to frame our vision around those, that would be helpful for me.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly work with Christian and tangentially with Josh or with Joe to look at how, let's do a gap analysis. Mm-hmm. Let's look at our policies in that June meeting. Maybe, I'm thinking, like the virtual chart paper kind of soup to nuts of how it all fits together. Mm-hmm. And then what I'm also hearing that should go on that June agenda is what are the threshold markers for those tiers, for what's a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 policy, and really sort of not necessarily institutionalizing, but codifying as a gentle step towards that, like how we approach different policies differently, knowing that that not every policy needs the same attention, but making sure that we get community input ahead of time so it's not us deciding exclusively what does and doesn't need attention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Any other comments on sort of that idea of coming to the June meeting to think about both the merger of the remains of the 2019-2020 calendar and the 2020-21 calendar development? Thoughts, ideas, needs? Okay. So then the next item on our agenda is compliance reviews, and looking at, I'm going to turn it back to Christian to just give us a framing on the agenda item, what sort of the scope is thinking on that one.
Sure. Again, this was also a conversation had previously. One of the ideas put out there was that previously could possibly some of the compliance reports be public. As of now, as Commissioner James Hassan mentioned, a lot of the compliance reports are only viewed by the board. So an idea that her and I discussed was possibly having, a section of policy committee to kind of talk about the implementation of those policies. So again, develop, advocating and leaving some part of policy committee talk about implementation and how that's going. But again, I would raise that would require less policies than we've done in the past to kind of fit all that in. But that's kind of where that idea came from, and just taking a look at our compliance reports and seeing which ones could be shared.
So anyone have thoughts on the idea of, and it especially to me dovetails nicely with us being able to deep dive into a smaller number of policies, but go deeper. One of the challenges in policy creation and development is so much is in the regulations and the implementation. So leaving space on the policy committee agenda to review policy compliance reports. Thoughts, yay, nay? Should they go on the tier, like tier ones we see, tier twos we don't? Just again, since we have the opportunity to really flesh this out publicly, Dr. Brooks, ideas?
I think one of the things that I'm sure you all have considered, and what I would need is figure out like sort of the things that we will want to share, sort of, has there been a particular rationale as to why certain pieces of the regulations have not been shared with the public? And if I have a better sense of that, what's some of the barriers to that? And then with that information, I could then sort of think about, the decision of whether or not we do a fewer to go deeper, and what those ones would look like.
Commissioner McFadden?
It's similar. Which compliance reports have information in them that's confidential, that wouldn't be privy to the public? I would just need to know the difference between what can be shared with the public in a compliance report versus what cannot be shared. I think that would be just helpful information to know.
Commissioner Lynn?
Yeah, I think definitely if we're going to talk about, which compliance reports to post or not, definitely think it should be the ones, of course, that does not include personnel things or, anything of that matter, just to ensure that we're properly, whether it's, around our student safety or, whatever it's around, we're ensuring that we're keeping those measures in place. So definitely, reports that definitely don't, include those things, I think those should, be reported to the public, because there's no, bearing on us, or legal bearing, I should say, that we would have to take in if we were to report those. So if we were ever to think about any ones to actually report, just ones that, don't include personnel or anything that is, confidential to students, to staff, or anything of that nature.
Okay. So now that you've all weighed in, so my reason for putting this on the agenda was it's challenging to me, given that we as a board, in compliance with Open Meetings Act, cannot have a single conversation about policy unless it's in the public sector. So then getting policy compliance reports in executive or administrative section is to me a violation of Open Meetings Act. So I think we need to be really, my vote would be as transparent with compliance reports as possible, and as public with compliance reports as possible. And very rarely in my experience has any compliance report ever had any identifying information as far as individuals or even to the school level. Some, just for background information in case you're not clear, some of our policies require, legally require and mandate an annual report, but several of those even are given only during executive session. So again, if it was just my decision, I would ask that all compliance reports are stripped of any identifying information specific down to a school or a teacher, but programmatically are comprehensive, and are presented publicly, either on the policy committee agenda that goes out through board docs publicly, through the public board meeting, but also leaving some space in the policy meeting agenda to discuss those, because our habit as a board, we oftentimes don't have time to discuss them. And staying at a governance level, discussing policy implementation compliance reports helps keep us out of management, but also helps us make sure that our policies are responsive to needs and being effective in the field. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that one. But I am only for this committee. So.
Just to piggyback off that, I definitely think that if we are able to, hide that information within those reports and, make them comprehensive to the public, I think we should definitely do them. I think, truthfully, I think those reports that do have, students' information in it, or, whether it deals with students or staff, I think those are the most important, reports that are needed, because those are reports that, see that definitely are pressing issues within the community and in our community that I think we are, addressing through these policy reports. Definitely, we talk about the trans policy, or gender identification policy. Those are definitely policies that we want to see the reports about, and want to see the outcome of these policies being implemented, and what is actually going on within those schools, because I think those are more of the compelling stories and more of the compelling reports that will make us understand and ensure that we're taking the proper steps in the proper channels as well. So just wanted to say that.
Other thoughts?
So, Dr. James, is your thinking to move the compliance reports from exec to the public agendas?
I feel like that's the most responsive and responsible way. Unless it is a compliance report that's going to somehow have any sort of identifying information, but that seems to me like it'd be more management than governance anyway. The reality, it's one of those where the first step to addressing any problem is admitting it. So sometimes we have compliance reports that aren't super favorable, and that doesn't happen very often, but it does. That those also should be public facing, that we should say, here's our scars, here's our opportunities, here's a snapshot of where we are today. And the more realistic we can be on the snapshots of today, the more we can effectively address challenges and move forward. But again, that's not my role to say how it should be. It's sort of our role as a committee to present opportunities to the rest of the board and get group decision making on that.
I like the idea. I just would also want to know, just like you said, what should we see, what should be confidential, and then what shouldn't be confidential, and moving forward. But I agree that those compliance reports should be put on the public agenda moving forward.
And how do you feel about us taking some time, or not us, but the policy committee, taking some time in each meeting to have the opportunity to discuss those?
Well, I would assume that we would see whatever the compliance report is prior to it actually coming to the full board in that public session, to kind of just give us some opportunity to converse and to wrap our heads around it as a committee before it is introduced to the full board in public session. Like we would do with, policies or readers. I think we should do the same with these compliance reports, because it also informs the work that we do moving forward in policy development. So I think it would only make sense to do it that way. And
I think it also helps with an archaeological understanding of policies. So policies that may not have come up in front of this policy committee in the composition that it is, the compliance report will to help see the intersections of priorly adopted policies and potential future needs for policies.
That's right. I think that's smart.
Okay. Dr. Brooks, anything to add?
I think I feel like I need to be in more discussion around impact and sort of what does it really mean to put particular information public and to discuss it publicly, and particularly around the compliance pieces. I just need time to kind of wrap my mind around that. Just so that I can think through scenarios. I need like those particular pieces there. But I feel like there's an act, right, where people can request information, right? The Information Act. So if there's anything that we already currently have, technically, someone could request it anyway. And as long as it's keeping people's information, de-identified, that sort of thing. So I'm just trying to run these things in my head. And I think it might be useful. And I also know that it's going to have an impact. And I just want to, not only a policy, but a district impact. And I just kind of have to sit with that to figure out what that might look like, even for the things that I want to see. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Commissioner Lynn, anything? And then just so that people know timetable, we've got a public board meeting starting in 7 minutes. So we'll let Commissioner Lynn.
Commissioner,
and then,
It starts at 5:30, I thought.
oh, it's 5:30. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was 5. All right, go ahead,
Well,
Commissioner Lynn.
okay. Just, just to ask Dr. Brooks. So when you talk about the Information Act, are you stating that to just say, like, what's the point of us, putting the compliance reports out if people can already have them? I'm just trying to understand what you're saying a little bit, just so I can know, like, in context, what's, the point of, you referencing the Information Act.
It's actually the inverse. So it's more so if they can already have it, then there's no reason for us not to give it. And just so that, because I do know that there has been in places where that has been put forth as important, right? So people have requested certain types of information from the district and they have not gotten it. Or it has been a delayed reaction time. And there might have been a million reasons why that particular information might have been delayed. I'm thinking particularly about the SOMO students and the requesting of data specific to immigrant and undocumented students, and having that process, how that took a lengthy time, and I'm not sure where that stands. So so that's what. So when I think about impact, I'm like, okay, so how might accelerating that process of getting that information, what could possibly be the impact? I'll leave it just like that of something like that if folks are requesting that information. That's all.
Yeah.
I just
wanted
wanted
we're
to,
not mixing our metaphors at all. So what I'm speaking about compliance reports are things like last week on our executive committee agenda, there was a compliance report on IK. It was the adapted physical education policy. I sent y'all an email on it. So that's a legally mandated public compliance report, but it was only given to us at executive session, so the public couldn't see it. And we can't talk about policy at executive session. So it's about making it more transparent for the community, is my goal. And typically policy compliance reports actually shouldn't get down to the granular level of who individually or what schools individually or anything like that. They should really be about that 10,000 foot view of what are the district levers to implement this policy and adhere to this policy. How's it going?
Okay, so
lean into solutions as well. Go ahead.
Okay, so on that point, Dr. Hassan, when you say it doesn't really get to the nitty who student, what student, of that nature, would you say that wholeheartedly a lot of compliance reports don't necessarily need to be redacted with students' information or school systems, just because it's more of a holistic view? I guess the word we use is holistic view of the actual policy and its implementation.
That's what a policy compliance report should be. Is the 10,000 foot level of this? These are the actions. This is the the cumulative impacts that we can measure.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the things that and I think this came to us publicly, but I don't know if we discussed it. The harassment, right? And so when we got that data, it came as a lump sum, so we could see the harassment data, but we did not see it broken down into any particularly important metrics around gender or what were the drivers of that. So we got a large, so you would never know who was doing what in that kind of set. but we just know the frequency of an occurrence, which means that I think we need to clean up that compliance report because we would need more specific information.
And Dr. Brooks, that is exactly why I wanted this on our conversation, because in exec, we can't have those conversations.
Yeah.
That is about policy. So if we don't have those conversations where the compliance reports are given, then how can we say to staff, we actually want this broken down by binary and non-binary identifying students, or by geographic location, so we can get, because one of my challenges, and this is not a negative about staff at all, but compliance reports have, to this point, prior to us having a policy committee, been very much a check the box, yes, we turned something in. And that something may have been a statement of, we have policy ABC, we've implemented policy ABC, period. But no impacts of policy ABC, or no holes missing that we've identified through this. And so in order to make policy more meaningful, robust, and responsive, having those policy compliance reports be able to be discussed in public, personally for me, I think is an important step in the process. But again, I'm just one person on this committee, so I don't want to make that kind of sweeping decision without everybody's input.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
So I think this is a helpful conversation, and I think part of when we talk about slowing down with policies too, I think compliance reports should be one of the things that we look at with that, because I think one of the challenges has been, in terms of, I agree with you that it's been mostly a check the box exercise, and partly it's because the sheer volume of policies we have, they almost all have a compliance report, and so we're talking about 5 or 6 a month that somebody has to pull together, and it's often the same small department that's trying to do that. And so I think in part, when we're looking at slowing down a little bit and the alignment and coherence of policies, we should be looking a little bit more thoughtfully at those compliance reports and trying to figure out what it is that we really need that would be helpful to your point, inform policy and really make sure we're doing a robust job at doing what we intend to do. And maybe it's we do a fewer number of compliance reports less frequently, but we do them more deeply. I think part of the challenge is the volume. And so I think as we look at this, we should be also looking at, okay, what would we really want to know that would be helpful? And knowing a lot of things, but a little bit about them is not that helpful. You might instead want to know a fewer number of things, but know them deeper. And I think that's part of the challenge that we should be weighing when we're thinking about this kind of reset of what we're doing with policy. And I think it makes sense to discuss them publicly. And if we slow down a little bit and do them more as deeply a report out, that would make sense and give us the capacity to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say that anything was trying to be hidden. It was about just there's this much, you've got a 1,000-pound elephant, you can only eat it one bite at a time. And board meetings are already going to 11 p.m. and so it's a delicate balance there.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, I think that's right. I think it's no ill intentions on anybody's part. I mean, I didn't think you were implying anything. I just think it is a reality of the way we've structured it. So I think we should think about how we structure it. If there's something we want different out of it, if we want more of a conversation, then we should think about what's sustainable in order to do that in a meaningful way so that it can inform the next revision to the policy or whatever changes we want to make.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've sort of touched on community engagement. So just teeing it up for the policy committee, in our June meeting, we'll look at specifics, and we'll have an actual calendar and write in what we want to see in August and what we want to see in September. Are there any of those things that are remaining residual that you want to say, I really want to see this in August, or do we want to turn it over completely to staff to figure out what works best for them?
I think right now, given the global crisis, I think we should really give more flexibility to staff in that area and in that capacity, because we are managing a crisis. I would say perhaps maybe next year when we look at it, there could be some potential alterations, but I think right now, given where we are, I think we should give them that flexibility in deciding that for July and August, at least for that time.
Okay, Dr. Brooks, any thoughts?
In agreement. Yep.
Commissioner Lynn?
Same.
Okay, so Allison, so I just wanted to confirm, because that's exactly where I felt as well. But once again, I'm not a committee of one. So just if you want to let staff know, take a breath and let us know what your needs are. And we'll accommodate that when we craft the schedule for 2021.
That sounds great.
All right, any other thoughts from any board members? Questions, anything for the group?
I'm certainly glad that Joshua Lynn, Commissioner Lynn, is not working today and that he is on this call with us. He's meeting with us from the safety of his home. I just wanted to chime in and say that.
I actually did go to work today. I'm actually open today from 7 to 2 p.m. So I just made it on time to the meeting. That's all.
Thank
Well,
you.
good. Yeah, and we're just praying, Josh, that you stay safe and well, because we need you to solve the world's complex problems. We do.
That's a
That's
big
for sure.
task and a big responsibility. I don't want that responsibility. I'll aid in some way, but I don't think the whole thing is my thing.
You'll be all right, Commissioner. You'll be all right.
Thank you.
You'll do a big chunk of it. Anything else you'd like to add, Josh?
No, I just, I just haven't been a part of the policy committee a little bit for a while now with my, abundant schedule and a lot of different things happening. But I really think that, this meeting was, very helpful and informative in a lot of ways. So I think that, moving forward, we know what we're having in place and, what's next to come. So I really do appreciate that. And, Dr. Hassan, I really appreciate you as the, policy committee leader. You've done so much. And I think, with this being my last year, I have, a couple more meetings with you guys. Just wanted to say that I love you all. I think that, it's been an amazing ride with everyone. And it's been, it's been a lot.
You will not give these goodbyes right now, Joshua. We're just
I'm
in
not giving
April.
any goodbyes. Oh God, they're just broad. I'll go in more in depth. I promise I will. But just no, seriously. Just really with a lot going on. I just I see all of us here strong. Still fighting the will for the people, and I just love it. And I just thank you all for believing in us as students. And us as community members and community leaders. I think that that's really a big thing for us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That's all. Now to go to this other meeting.
Darrell, anything from you?
Nope, just appreciation for the time and the space, and appreciate you framing this as a real collective process and helping to reorient sort of my thinking about sort of the policy committee and sort of making sure that we're staying in communication with one another, and then the best ways to sort of collaboratively support through policy our CEO in our district. So it's really helpful. Thank you.
Allison, anything that you'd like to say?
No, other than it just didn't even occur to me that this was Josh's last year. It's not really your last year, is it? You've got a whole nother year in school. You can continue.
Yeah, but I've spent 2 years on the board, and it's.
I know. Oh, so is that the limit?
But yes, it's a 2-year term limit.
Could the policy committee vote to waive that?
I mean, you can.
But what I think that is that in our board rules, or is that in our policy, or is it in COMAR that the student commissioner can only serve 2 years? I think that's something that we should double check.
Or is that
I mean, historically, we've had student commissioners that have been student commissioners like their junior or their senior year. Joshua is an exception because his first year was his 10th grade year, his sophomore year, which is, I want to say, unprecedented. So yeah. It would be interesting to know what the limits are for
Yeah, and we of course should ask Joshua whether we would even want to do it another year, but I just.
Yeah, I said you guys.
But I thought we were getting you on the stage.
Next year, so I was thinking that meant we had next year too. So you should probably ask Joshua whether or not you would want to stay, but we would, of course, would love you to stay. And in my mind, you already were staying, so this was news to me. So.
And I've been trying to get to angle to help get you on the state board. So let me know.
Commissioner
Yeah,
McFadden, real
yeah.
quick, it's in Comar actually.
It is? Okay. What if he changes schools or school districts?
Oh my God! I don't wait.
How
Maybe changes his name. You know, I mean, come on.
I can be Joseph. I look a little more like a Joseph
There
than
you
a
go.
Josh.
Creative thinking.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Board Executive Gant, anything you'd like to add for the good of the group?
No, thank you.
All right, so let me recap, and anybody jump in if I'm not correct. We are tabling the resolution. Okay.
Yeah.
And we will meet again as a policy committee for our scheduled meeting in June prior to the board business meeting to have a deep dive on the calendar for the 2021 school year, to look at what we're going to scoop up from this year and how we're going to disperse that through next year with a gap analysis of what needs to happen, as well as sort of codifying how we're going to triage policy from tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 based on the need for public comment and engagement, the timeline for public comment and engagement, and the reader process related to that within our current policy constraints. And then the third piece, to do a gap analysis on what policies might be in need of attention. Any corrections or modifications on those?
No, I would just add for the June meeting, if perhaps board staff or family and community engagement staff can just boost up perhaps the PR and the advertisement about that June session, so that we can get as much input as we possibly can virtually between now and the time that we come back together in June.
And I would also personally like to tee up to community engagement, to understanding that that's a big lift policy, and it's been tabled a couple of times in the 2019-2020 school year for very good reasons. But that it's one that I'm guessing the policy committee is going to want to help lean into sooner rather than later in the fall calendar, if that's at all possible, knowing that right now our relationships have been illustrated to matter more than almost anything else. So how we help support that office in doing that work. Other thoughts?
Was anyone signed up to comment today from the public?
That was my next question to Christian. So
No, there were no public signups.
okay. And nobody has put in the chat anything urgent. So if it's all right with everyone, yes. All right, so at 5:11 p.m. we will adjourn. We will reconvene for a special public board meeting at 5:30 today, and the next time the policy committee meeting will meet will be in June on the, I'm going to talk really slow and long words, so Christian can give me a date because I can't look it up on my computer while I'm talking.
It looks like the 16th of June.
16th of June, thank you.
McFadden beat me to it.
Perfect. All right. So the 16th of June at 3:30 p.m. Anything else for the good of the group? Going once, going twice. I appreciate you all. I appreciate the robust discussion and your mindful presence with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.